welcome.
Is this on? It's on, good. Make sure this is on. Thank you for that introduction. This is unusual for me to be introduced to come up here and speak in this venue, but it's also exciting. One person that we didn't thank, my fault, I left her off the list, was Van Flanagan, who also helped with the check-in and registration. So thank you, Van. Okay, those of you who know me know that I got to get moving, because if I don't get moving, there won't be any time for Andreas, and we're really here to listen to Andreas. So I'm going to start talking. I will slow down. Today's talk, especially this first introductory talk that I'm going to give, is not meant to go into great detail on our topic. It's to be, I intended to be just an overview, a brief overview that will focus on the importance of virtue in the workplace. And I want you to think in terms of our principal stakeholders in any business. Since we're a religious gathering here, right? We're Catholics and Christians, so it's a little bit of a unique setting in terms of normal speaking to a secular business group. But we're also a collection of business people. And when we think about a business endeavor, there's a number of stakeholders that it's important to remember as we go through our work, go through the ordinary work of our day. And those can be broken down into a variety of categories. We'll just keep them at the general level. If you think about the employer and the employee, or the person you report to and the people who report to you. There's also outside vendors and collaborators and consultants and others that work with you to deliver whatever product or service that your focus is on. And of course, there's the customer or client. And then very importantly, obviously, are the owners, the shareholders. And in order, I would argue, in order for us to be able to achieve both personal and organizational excellence, we need to keep in mind all of the needs and all of the concerns and all of the experiences of each of these stakeholders. Obviously, if we went into greater detail on this topic, we could break those down into even finer groups, but you get the idea. Essentially, I believe that for personal fulfillment, we need to be focused on doing the right thing at work at all times. And in so doing so, we will work towards achieving personal excellence as well as organizational excellence, creating a healthy work environment and culture, and a satisfied client base. And ultimately, that will lead to superior financial performance. Okay? I'm going to start you off with an exercise. I want you to imagine that you're about to hire somebody. You're at the interviewing stage, which means that you've given some thought to this before. Essentially, what we're dealing with here is you have a need for a new hire, and that new hire is going to be leading several business development teams. So they're going to be overseeing several different teams, and those teams are going to consist of both subject matter expertise, business development folks, as well as the IT folks and human resource that are involved in this particular project. And the person that is needed is going to have client management skills, both to serve internal and external clients. Without any more information, I want you at your tables to spend about 5 or 10 minutes and just come up with a consensus on what you think would be the top 4 qualities of the person you're looking for. Start. Okay, has everybody identified 4 qualities? Has anyone not identified 4 qualities? I thought this would go quickly. Oh, you got 2, you need 2 more. Okay, anyone else? Now, obviously, one of the things I'm asking for up there is reasoning behind your selection as well, and that obviously could change based upon whatever circumstances your table placed on the hiring situation. But who would like to just share with the group the strengths that you're looking for? Yes?
Okay, our table came up with the first one being intelligence.
Intelligence.
Listening skills.
Listening skills.
Interpersonal relationship skills.
Interpersonal relationship.
And service-oriented.
And service-oriented. Very good. Yes?
Okay, we came up with leadership, integrity, interpersonal skills, and acumen.
Yes.
Very good.
Acumen.
Acumen.
Business acumen.
Okay, yes.
So we said integrity and character,
Okay.
genuine caring about people, communication skills, and humility.
Very good. Someone over here? Don't be bashful. Yes.
Servant mentality, humility, good communication skills, and then having the ability to understand the vision looking forward.
Okay, understand the vision looking forward. Communication skills. Humility's coming up. Character's coming up. Yes.
Also getting technical expertise. You know, we're talking about HR and IT, having expertise in the actual field.
Okay.
So some of those soft skills as well.
Yes, since I mentioned the team consisted of subject matter experts, the person has to be able to communicate and understand that technical quality as well. Yes.
We had empowering,
Empowering. I want everyone to remember this one. Empowering. Yes.
responsibility,
Responsibility,
humility, and communication.
humility, and communication skills. Yes.
Technical skills, communication skills, and time management.
Okay. Time management's a new one on the list there. So a person has to be organized as well. So if we drew up a larger list that combined all of these different strengths, we get a good picture of the type of person that we're looking for. And then the next thing that would be important, if I back up just a little bit, is in this process being able to ascertain if the strengths that you're looking for are present in the individual you're interviewing. And that's not always easy, is it? But today is not a day about how to interview people, so we'll leave that for another time. But I do want to move ahead with this backdrop in place and talk about forms and types of human excellence, because we moved all around and covered a variety of categories of human excellence. And the ones that we oftentimes think of at the beginning are the natural human talents. There are some people who are just naturally gifted to be able to do particular things, whether in my own family, for the most part, we have a natural aptitude towards math. You know, the thing about people who can see math is that you can see the beauty in math, but someone who doesn't have that inclination, it's unlike looking at a painting. You don't have to be an artist to look at a painting and appreciate its beauty, but you have to have a math mind to be able to conceive of the beauty in math or to perceive it. But some people have a natural high intelligence or affinity or inclination towards arts, literature, philosophy, the physical science, social sciences, math, athletics, musical instruments. You might be a prodigy, or you might have a natural inclination to be able to learn how to play the piano. Not everybody can develop the complementary strengths necessary to play a bass clef and a treble clef at the same time, right? So you have a natural talent. But you also have acquired skills, or things that we learn. Or we can improve upon our natural talents through practice. And just to keep in your back of your mind as we go through this, think about a golfer. Think about Think about a Greg Norman or a Tiger Woods or an Arnold Palmer or any of the great names from golf. Yeah, I'm showing my age. And I did include Tiger, but he's old now too. If you think about the number of golf balls these guys hit at the driving range and the routines that they go through, it's not mindless, it's deliberate, and we'll be talking about that as well. But the practice that's necessary to rise to the top of their field is enormous. And so you're continually acquiring additional knowledge and expertise to be able to excel in the areas of your interest. You're constantly observing things and taking it in and processing and learning from it and growing in practical wisdom. Practice, practice, remember that. And then, of course, we can look at the type of human excellence which is in the form of achievements. Awards that you've received, degrees you've earned, certifications, things of that nature. Recognition from your peers or other people, advancing through the various positions in your career, setting your goals and attaining them. But I would like to suggest that there is another type, as Phil in the introduction spoke about. There's a higher type of human excellence which is important and is also the subject of today's talks. And that is virtue. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about moral human virtues. There's another rabbit hole I could go down, so I'll stop right there. Let me just quote from the Catechism here. This should be on your handouts as well. Human virtues are firm attitudes, stable dispositions, habitual perfections of intellect and will that govern our actions, order our passions, and guide our conduct according to reason and faith. And then on the next screen, the moral virtues are acquired by human effort. So we know that we have to expend the effort to acquire these. They are the fruit and seed of morally good acts, and they dispose all the powers of the human being for communion with divine love. Now, fortunately, again, we have a Catholic or Christian audience here today, so I have to talk about another element. It's not all about what we do. It's also about who we are. And it's about what God has given to us. So I want you to also consider from Catechism paragraph 1810 that the human virtues that are acquired by education, by deliberate acts, by a perseverance, ever renewed in a repeated effort, remember that, repeated, practice, 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 that these efforts are purified and elevated by divine grace. If you think back to your religious education days, we've got our theological virtues, and we've got our human virtues. Nothing that we do in the order of grace, nothing that we do in terms of our supernatural end amounts to anything if we do it absent the grace that God has given to us and that Christ has merited for us upon the cross. So we have to keep that in the back of our mind. It doesn't matter that we're in the workplace. We're still Catholics when we're in the workplace. Whether the workplace is specifically a Catholic place or not, we're still guided by who we are. And who we are Catholic Christians who are adopted sons and daughters of Almighty God. And so by His grace, our efforts are purified and lifted up, right? We are able to do, because it's no longer we who live, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. We are now able to perform all those works that God has prepared for us beforehand. So when you go back out into the workplace, don't forget that you're Catholic. And don't forget this tremendous advantage that you have through the sacramental life. Okay? What I want to talk about now are four particular moral virtues that we call the cardinal virtues. And these virtues are important in the sense that every other human virtue that we might practice depends upon or is connected in some way, or as the Latin meaning for cardinal indicates, hinges upon these four cardinal virtues. And they are justice, prudence, or we might call wisdom in today's language, fortitude or courage, and moderation, what we would call temperance. So let's look at the Catechism's definitions of these four. Justice is the moral virtue that consists in the constant and firm will to give their due to God and neighbor. And Aquinas would argue, since we have our Aquinas representative here, Aquinas would argue that not only do we give our due to God and neighbor, we give them more. And especially our neighbor, because our neighbor is a masterpiece of Almighty God, or is intended to be. Right? Prudence is that virtue that disposes practical reason to discern our true good in every circumstance and to choose the right things or the right means of achieving it. Which, again, begs a question, are you, as you go through your workday and go through life, as you take decisions or consider options, are you assessing what you're about to do? Are you evaluating the act that you're about to commit or not commit based upon who you are and who God's intended you to be? Prudence is that due diligence that you give everything that you do. And then fortitude or courage is that moral virtue that ensures firmness in difficulties and constancy in your effort. It's important that you be willing to sacrifice yourself for the right thing, no matter the cost. It's always the right time to do the right thing. And no matter the cost, are you willing to bear whatever sacrifice you must in order to be true to that? And I know some of you in here, and I know that some of you have gone through there and have suffered the consequences of doing the right thing. But in doing so, you've been blessed more than you've suffered, and you found joy. It also gives you the ability to stick to what you're doing, right? Because once we start something, if we're going to be diligent, we're going to see it through to the end, another human virtue, right? Diligence. We're going to see it through to the end, and we're going to make sure that we get to the end and do it well in the process. And sometimes that takes enormous courage, especially today. And temperance is the moral virtue that moderates the attraction of pleasures and provides balance in the use of created goods. And those of you who have studied the fall or understand creation in the fall understand that we began with some gifts, preternatural gifts that included this thing called integrity, which we hear of, right? And integrity in that sense or in that meaning was a balance between our appetites and our will. You know, just because something's good doesn't mean I should consume it until I can't possibly bear to consume anymore. So the right use of things and proper restraint and self-control is an important cardinal virtue that assists us and aids us in all of the other virtues. So these other virtues that I'm speaking of, these other moral virtues, there's a number of them for any given circumstance and any given person and where you are in your spiritual life and professional life. There are human virtues that need your attention right now, that you need to be working on developing. Now remember, I haven't mentioned it, but virtues, moral virtues are actions that become habitual. They become part of who you are. They become a habit, a good habit. And as such, these habits form your character. How many times did we hear a minute ago that character was important in the hiring decision? Well, character is not something that you do. Character is something you are. But it comes from something you do. It comes from a lifetime of practicing good behavior, these moral virtues. And I think in my sense right now for me, that humility, we heard humility a lot. We heard empowerment. I think of magnanimity, striving for excellence, not just for myself, but for the organization I'm a part of. Caring. And I think caring is so underrated. But if you go back and study philosophy and original Greek thought, caring was such an important aspect of understanding who we are. Didn't say what we do, but who we are. If you're looking for somebody to get the job done but not leave bodies in the wake, you want a caring person. They care about getting the job done. And they're going to do what they say. And they're going to do it in a way that builds up everybody around them. If they see somebody on the team who is struggling, they don't step on that person in order to further their own career and advancement. They go lift that person up and help them, and thereby improve the performance of the entire team. And that's a person of character doing that. And persons of character get recognized. We don't do this for the recognition, but you can't help but get recognized because people are drawn to you. So take this list, and I didn't have enough room to put the other couple of hundred that need to be considered on here. But this is just an introduction and overview. Okay, why should we care? Why do employers care? And again, the purpose of my talk today is not to provide you with studies and evidence that this is important stuff. I think it would all resonate in a crowd like this, you know it is. But you can go out and find study after study and documentation of those studies that show that the health of a corporate culture and the quality of the people that make up that culture can make the absolute difference in the success of the organization. It's essential. It's not enough just to be able to get the job done. It's how you get the job done that's also important. And particularly in these last few years, from the financial crisis we entered into, when it became so much more difficult to do business, when it became so much more difficult to meet the goals, meet the financial goals that we had. And those organizations that were healthy organizations fared a lot better. It's important for us to realize, I think, would you not agree? I've heard Randy say this before. We spend most of our waking hours at this point in our careers on the job. And work is not a drudgery that is a punishment for the fall. It is the occasion for our sanctification. And so if it is true, as the church teaches and Christ demands, and since Christ is truth himself, and he says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, right? And since Vatican II reminds us that there is this thing called the universal call to holiness, it's not just for religious and clergy, but for the laity as well. And since we spend most of our time at work, then this becomes extremely important in our own sanctification. To be able, as we seek personal and organizational excellence, to do so according to who we are and not just what we do. And who we are is a likeness that God had of us in his mind at the beginning of all time, at the moment of creation. He knew each one of us. And he had this image and likeness of who we are. And so our effort should be to achieve excellence as we succeed in our work life, to draw back and conform ourselves to that image. So why do we worry about this? If we make good, right decisions, which is the natural outgrowth of being a virtuous people at work. I say people as the plural because we're not individualist. We might be individuals, but we're part of a larger family. So if we make right decisions at work as a people at work, then the number one thing that happens right away is, and Phil can attest to this, we, as an attorney, we reduce our exposure. So one of the things that really hurts us as an organization is if we're constantly fighting to defend ourselves against people who are not happy with us or who've been injured by us. So the first thing we've done is reduced exposure. And in making right decisions on a habitual basis through the habitual practice of the moral human virtues, then we are forming good work habits and building stronger relationships, which is of paramount importance in this day and age. So that leads to improved performance of the organization. And that promotes a healthy corporate culture. Now, when you have a healthy corporate, how many of you have worked in good ones and bad ones? You know the difference. And how often have you wanted to escape the bad situations and run for your lives? In a healthy corporate culture, then you are going to find that you have higher employee morale and therefore higher employee retention. And as an organization, you spend so much time and money and effort on recruiting and training and equipping people to do what you need them to do for your organization, it's a shame to lose them. You spend all your money getting them ready and they go over to your competitor. It's a horrible waste. So a healthy corporate culture can overcome that. And of course, all of this leads to satisfied clients. So your clients don't leave. They don't argue about your fees. They're willing to cut you some slack when things don't go exactly right. And so you increase your revenues and your profits. All of this comes by improving the excellence of your workforce towards the moral good. Because if you ask yourself the question, who do I want as my friend? Do I want somebody who's going to be honest with me, or somebody who's going to lie to me constantly? Do I want somebody who's going to tell secrets about me, lies about me? Do I want somebody who's going to stab me in the back? Do I want somebody who's only going to use me and not appreciate me? No. Well, you don't want that kind of person working for you either. Nor do you want to work in an organization that has that type of mentality. So, yes, it's extremely important that when you're seeking an employee, that the employee have the necessary talents and skills to do the job. But it's equally or probably even more important that that person also have those higher human qualities, those higher excellences. Okay, we got time for another table discussion. This one's easy. It's a real situation. And it's not so much to solve the problem, although I'm going to ask you to do that, as much as it is just get into the exercise of looking for what type of person could have helped you avoid the problem in the first place, and what type of person is best equipped to get you out of the problem. And again, it's fairly simple. The problem is that at the request of an employee who works for one of your clients, and let's consider this to be one of your most important clients for your organization, that an employee at that firm asked one of your employees to cover an expense. And your employee did that. And it's what you would have expected your employee to do. But and this is not a small amount. Subsequent to that, the client's employee approaches your employee and says, I got a problem. I had no idea it was going to be that much money. So what I need you to do is I need you to take that amount of money. I need you to pad other expenses, maybe increase your hours. We'll cover the cost. Don't worry about it. I just can't let my boss know the size and scope of what we spent and why. So what do you do? How do you get yourself out of this? What's the right thing to do? Take about 5 minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and get back started again. The example I gave, this exercise was intentionally for this day a bit vague, but it's happened twice in my experience, things I've been involved in. Once it was relatively minor, a few $1,000s. In another case, it was significantly expensive, over $100,000, but small in the overall scheme of the contract. And in each case, we had a very similar outcome. So I'm interested in hearing from you. What did you think about this? What would you say would be the proper, hopefully the proper thing to do is pretty obvious, but how would you go about it, and what type of people would you make sure or desire that you had working on your team, as well as within your client, to make sure this doesn't happen? Anyone? No one? Yes?
When I read that question, I assumed that this was a lower level employee and being asked to do something. To me, the obvious thing for that employee to do was to raise the flag and to bring in to the supervisor, who then will deal with it on a different level. But not, if it's a bookkeeper, for example, being asked to overlook something, you know, that's sort of above his or her pay grade.
And one of the circumstances, it was the first situation. In fact, let me give you the details that go with the smaller infraction, if you will. It actually happened to me, and it happened a number of years ago. And it happened with a client of mine who had visited Atlanta for a major project and brought their entire team down. And some of the people on that team had to stay for an extended period until we finished the project. And at the end of it, they invited me out. I didn't invite them. They invited me out to dinner. They wanted to know where would be a good place to go. So I mentioned, Bones, Chops, Anthony's Wine Cellar, Hedgerows Heights. Again, I'm showing my age, right? Man, do I wish Hedgerows was still around. But anyway, we ended up at Anthony's Wine Cellar, and we sat downstairs. And these people were just enjoying their wine. And why don't we try some from that bin? There's not a lot left in there. It must be a good one. And, of course, they were picking the most expensive bottles possible. I think we had one bottle that was approaching $1,000. And so obviously at the end of the night, the individual got the bill and had to pull me aside and say, Mike, I can't pick up this tab. I'll lose my job. So I had to make a decision on the spot as to what to do. And so what I did in that situation was I picked up the tab, and fortunately I had an American Express that allowed me to do it. My Visa, sure, or Bank of America or whatever it was at the time, surely would not have allowed me to do that. But then I had a problem. And the problem came when I was instructed as to what I was supposed to do with that. And so the thought process that we went through, obviously we were not going to pad any billing. That was just not going to happen. So my immediate concern was whether or not I was going to be reimbursed. And my employer said, oh, well, without a doubt, you're going to be reimbursed. But we are not going to pass this on to our client. But we had a number of issues, number of decisions that had to be made, things that I wasn't even thinking about at the time. And one of them, the most difficult of all, was my immediate supervisor, my boss, was of the mind that it was important for him to let the client know what had happened, because this individual was suggesting something deceptive involving the person they worked for. Didn't even occur to me then. But that was an example of the pursuit of truth and honesty and integrity on the part of my boss, and it was a lesson that I learned. So you consider all of those things, and then you have to think about, well, how do I do this now? We really valued the relationship with the individual who asked us to do that. And so my boss went about a period of reflection, in his words, of how can I best raise this issue with our client to achieve the following outcome. Transparency, candor, and we don't want to destroy this guy's career. We want him to learn from it, but we don't want him to suffer unduly from it. And that's what guided him. And so it's a lesson that I've kept with me as well. Okay, need to move on. What happened to the individual? I wish I could tell you there was a great outcome, and I don't know that there wasn't, but he was gone within a year. It just did. Some things are tough to overcome at that place. He ended up doing very well in his next position, but he didn't continue with that company. Okay, quickly I want to talk about 3 different approaches. We've talked about virtue, we've talked about pursuing excellence and how the practice of virtue is important in that, as well as developing and continuing to improve our professional skills, strengthen our networks and expand our networks, do the normal things that are necessary that we always think of in order to get better at what we do and to advance in our career. I'm suggesting to you that you also need to be spending time practicing the virtues as well, because failure to do that is going to cost you, right? In looking at virtue and ethics, though, we ought to take just a moment out to look at you might be making your decisions based upon outcomes, right? As Catholics, though, I shouldn't really have to say that the ends never justify the means, right? So if we're making our decisions, if we're judging whether or not to do things based upon outcomes alone, then that could produce some pretty bad choices. We can all see that, right? But there's rules that we have to follow as well. And I'm not one who talks down rules. I believe in rules. Rules are important. Rules help inform us, help teach us. And so I think it's important for us to understand rules and their purpose, not to follow them blindly, not to worship them for their own sake, but to use them as light from Christ to inform what we're doing, right? So rules-based ethics would be driven by expectations, yes, but really following a set of internal and external rules. We all know the natural law. There's things written in our very core of our being, our conscience, written into our makeup, that we know without having to be taught are wrong, and that we should not do them. But what I'm talking about today is not so much what we do and what rules we have to follow, as much as I'm talking about developing who you are, being true to who you are. You know, the question may be from time to time when we're faced with decisions whatever the field of ethics might be, whatever field of work that you're in, we've got medical ethics, we've got legal ethics, we've got all sorts of ethics out there. And if all you're doing is asking yourself what you should do, and you're failing to ask yourself who you should be, then you're missing out on part of the equation. So the fundamental question needs to also include not just what should I do, but who should I be? Remember I said a little bit earlier that virtues are habits, right? Virtues are habits, and those habits, habitual virtue becomes part of who we are and serves to form our culture, our character. How many of you run the Peachtree Road Race? How many of you could run the Peachtree Road Race right now without any practice? Some of you could. I'd like to think I could, but I'd probably die. What happens is that through practice, you build up endurance. You may not be able to run 6 point whatever miles out in the heat of July 4th up Cardiac Hill right now, but if you practice, you can, because that practice has an effect upon what you're able to do, because it changes who you are. You go from a not so healthy person to a much more healthy person cardiovascular-wise. Be able to breathe and to pump blood and all of that good stuff, because you've trained your body. Well, the practice of virtues does the same thing. It makes you a better person. It makes you become more of the person God intended you to be. So if you're looking to be a generous person at work, if you're looking to be an honorable person at work, if you're looking to be a person of integrity, if you practice those virtues that build those things up, those characteristics up, you will become that person. All right? So I'm going to go through this rather quickly. I want to leave time for some brief Q&A if you have any, and also leave time for a quick break before our next speaker. But I've included at the back a personal plan for success. And I want you to start off by thinking about being self-aware. If you don't know anything about yourself, then go ask somebody else about yourself. You know, if as a good Catholic you can't figure out what you need to be confessing in the confessional, ask your spouse. They'll tell you in no time. Be humble and generous. Get into the habit of practicing a daily examine, where you're taking stock of your day. What did I do that was good? What did I not do that I should have done? And as you in this general exam, and as you start identifying patterns, then maybe you provide on a periodic basis a little bit more focus on those areas that you need to improve. And you adjust your goals. You adjust your goals accordingly. And you will then continue to evaluate yourself in light of that change. Number two, I'm going to make a big assumption here, and that is two big assumptions. Number one is that you know what your company's values are. That also means not just knowing what they say their values are, but knowing what they really are, because they might not be the same thing. And then number two, whether or not you approve of those values. If you don't approve of those values, then maybe you need to have a discussion or start looking. But how are you carrying out your job? How are you performing your work? The things that you do day in and day out, do they promote and support and nurture those values? Sustain those values? Are you sustained by them? Or are your values that you are exhibiting by how you're doing your work at odds with your company's values? And what you need to do is have that as being part of your self-evaluation and identifying those virtues that you need to work on that will help you conform, not just to the image that God has of you, the likeness that God has for you, but also helps you conform to what the company expects of you. Number three, remember the cardinal virtues. You can't get along without them. So justice, giving others their due and more, prudence, making good, thoughtful, effective decisions, being not afraid to do the right thing at all times and to see the job done through to the end, no matter what obstacles are placed in your way, and being able to exercise self-control and restraint through the practice of moderation. The fourth area is to focus on your relationships. We need our healthy relationships in order to be healthy ourselves. We need to have developed relationships with other people, which means we need to treat other people, again, justly, back to justice again, right? We need to be following the greatest of models that we can follow, which is who? Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ emptied himself of his reliance upon his divinity and came to us as a servant and modeled servant leadership to us, didn't he? We need to strive for transparency and candor without being wide open in today's culture, in today's environment, and candid with one another. And that means giving other people permission to be candid with you. Then we're not going to move ahead within the organization, and we're not going to progress individually. And we need to seek trusted advice where appropriate. We are not always the best judge of ourselves and our circumstances. And, bears repeating, be humble and generous. All right. I want you to think about this as I close. To be virtuous, then, is to be authentic. To be virtuous is to be authentic. It is to be conformed to the likeness that God has in mind for us. Aquinas would say it is being the best person of yourself that you can be. Matthew Kelly, we'll throw him in with Aquinas, right? Being the best version of yourself. Authenticity, without that, you're nothing. You can pursue all of your life, all of the other talents and skills and acquired recognitions and things of the world, and you will achieve nothing if you haven't become the person that God wants you to be. And it's through virtue and grace that we can become that person. And in doing so, we can also become the person that our organizations need us to be, so that we can help other people within that organization seek their own and achieve their own professional and personal excellence as well. Okay, we've got time for just a couple of questions if you have any.